They put me at the kids' table. That was the moment the laughter in the hall dimmed for me. Not because anyone actually went silent, but because my ears stopped listening. I stood there for half a heartbeat, blinking at the little place card with my name tucked between paper napkins covered in cartoon balloons. The rest of the room was all gold runners and floral centerpieces. My place? Right next to a wobbly high chair and a sticky cup of apple juice. What would you do if your own family humiliated you in front of everyone? This story will make you lean in from the very first second. I didn't gasp. I didn't roll my eyes. I simply adjusted the collar of my blouse, smoothed the edge of my shawl, and walked toward the seat like nothing was wrong. Inside, though, a quiet switch flipped. It was 6:42 p.m. on a crisp Saturday evening. My parents' house was lit up like a wedding venue, every chandelier turned on, every candle burning in perfect alignment. The hall smelled like buttered rolls and expensive perfume. A pianist in the corner played something classical, though it was drowned out by the clinking of glasses and forced laughter from people wearing clothes too tight for their comfort. I pulled out the little wooden chair, too small, slightly squeaky, and sat down with my hands folded neatly in my lap. Across the table, two children were building towers with breadsticks. One little boy, maybe 7, pointed at me with jam on his fingers. "You're not a kid," he said plainly. "No," I answered softly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "I'm not." I felt eyes on me. From the main table, my sister leaned toward my mother and whispered something, followed by a short, sharp laugh. My mother didn't even glance at me. She was too busy raising her glass, toasting to family unity. I kept my face composed, but my fingers traced the edge of my water glass, slow and deliberate, like someone turning a key in a lock. They thought this was funny. They thought this was harmless. But they'd made a mistake, one they didn't even realize yet. A young waiter leaned in awkwardly, trying to pour me sparkling water without knocking over the paper napkins shaped like swans. "Would you like some wine, ma'am?" he asked in a whisper. I shook my head gently. "Not tonight." His relief was visible. Perhaps he didn't want to explain to the head table why he'd run out of Chardonnay. I watched him walk away, his shoes squeaking against the polished floor. The smallest details stick with you in moments like these. The sound of forks tapping against porcelain. The floral arrangement blocking my view of the cake table. My father's booming laugh from across the room, the one he saved for guest he wanted to impress. I adjusted my shawl again, not because I was cold but because I needed my hands to stay steady. My heart wasn't racing. If anything, it was slowing down. I'd learned long ago that real power doesn't come from reacting quickly. It comes from watching long enough to see where the cracks already are. At 6:58 p.m., a woman at the adult table, a family friend from church, leaned toward my sister and asked, not quietly, "Why is she sitting over there?" My sister shrugged, feigning innocence. "She wanted to," she lied effortlessly. I almost laughed. I hadn't said a single word since I arrived. The boy next to me started throwing peas across the table. A toddler smeared mashed potatoes into her hair. One of the little girls turned and asked, "Are you someone's grandma?" "Yes," I said. "I'm my own." She giggled, not understanding, but it didn't matter. The sentence had been more for me than for her. The speeches started shortly after. My mother stood in her emerald green dress, holding a microphone like she was the star of a charity gala. "Tonight," she began, her voice sweet but practiced, "we celebrate love, family, and unity. We are so grateful to have everyone we care about under one roof." Her eyes swept across the room. They paused on neighbors, on distant cousins, on church friends. They skipped me completely. I raised my water glass slowly anyway, like a ghost saluting from the shadows. Halfway through her speech, my father patted her hand proudly, nodding along as if this night were a performance they'd rehearsed for years. Maybe it was. Their anniversaries had always been grand, too grand, really, for two people who spent most of their marriage in silent resentment. But appearances mattered more than truth in that house. I leaned back in my small chair, letting the piano music blend with the chatter. And as I did, my fingers brushed against the edge of my handbag resting at my feet. Inside, beneath tissues and a folded scarf, was a thick brown folder. It had sat untouched for years, collecting dust at the back of my closet. Until last week. Until I decided to bring it tonight. Just in case. By 7:20 p.m., dinner was being served. The waiters carried out plates of roasted chicken, potatoes, and green beans. They started at the head table, of course, moving slowly down the line. When they reached the children's table, one server hesitated, holding a tray of chicken tenders and fries. He looked at me, uncertain. "I'll take the regular meal," I said evenly. "Oh yes, of course," he stammered, quickly retreating to the kitchen. A few guests noticed, exchanging curious looks. I kept my eyes on my plate, hiding the flicker of amusement behind my calm expression. From across the room, my sister caught my gaze. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. There was something sharp there, something performative. She'd orchestrated this seating arrangement. I could tell. She always loved little power plays, the subtle humiliations no one else noticed. But she underestimated me. She always had. At 7:33 p.m., a small incident unfolded near the dessert table. One of the younger cousins knocked over a vase. Water splashed across the floor, soaking the bottom of the tablecloth. My mother's face twisted in irritation for a brief second before she quickly smoothed it over. But I caught it. I always catch the moments they think no one sees. That tiny disruption rippled through the room. Waiters scrambling, guests pausing mid-bite, whispers rising. I watched my parents' carefully controlled evening wobble ever so slightly. It was nothing major, just a crack in the glass. But cracks have a way of spreading when pressure builds. A little after 7:45 p.m., my sister approached me with a falsely sweet smile. She crouched slightly as if speaking to a child. "Are you comfortable here?" she asked, loud enough for a few nearby guests to hear. "I'm fine," I answered simply. "You sure?" she pressed, tilting her head. "We didn't think you'd mind. You're so adaptable." I placed my fork down slowly, letting the metal click against the plate. "Yes," I said softly, "I'm sure." For the first time all night, something flickered in her expression. A flash of uncertainty. I didn't give her more. I didn't need to. At 8:02 p.m., as the pianist switched to a slower tune, I stood up. Quietly. No announcement. No dramatic pause. I slipped my shawl over my shoulders, picked up my handbag and tucked the brown folder under my arm. A few of the children glanced up, confused, their mouths covered in frosting. But no one else noticed. The door to the hallway was only a few steps away. Each footstep echoed slightly against the polished floor. Tick, tick, tick. A few heads turned when the sound grew louder. By the time I reached the exit, the pianist's music had softened enough that my departure became noticeable. My father looked up from his seat mid-laugh. My mother paused, microphone still in hand. My sister froze mid-conversation. Our eyes met across the room. Just for a second. Her smile faltered. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a glare. I simply held her gaze, calm and unwavering, then turned away. Outside, the night air was cool against my face. I stood under the glowing porch lights for a moment, breathing it in. The laughter from inside was muffled through the walls, like a distant radio station I'd stopped listening to. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone and scrolled to one name. My thumb hovered for a moment, not out of doubt but timing. Then I pressed call. He answered on the second ring. "I was wondering when you'd finally use that folder," my lawyer said, his voice steady. "Tonight," I replied. "I'm ready." I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to. The moment I stepped into my car, the engine humming softly, I knew the game had changed. They thought sitting me at the kids' table was harmless. But they'd forgotten something important. I wasn't a guest at their celebration anymore. I was the storm they'd quietly invited in. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to. The moment I turned the key in my car, the soft click under my fingers felt like the start of something I couldn't postpone anymore. The engine hummed low and steady. Streetlights stretched long shadows across the driveway, making the house look smaller than it ever had before. For years that place had loomed over me. Tonight it didn't. The drive home was quiet, just the steady rhythm of tires on asphalt and the occasional street lamp flicking past the windshield. My hands rested firmly on the wheel. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't second-guessing. The calm that settled in me was different from the quiet I'd worn for decades. This was sharper, deliberate, like the air before a storm breaks. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light flickered to life automatically, washing the front steps in a warm yellow glow. I turned off the car and sat there for a moment, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine. My lawyer's words echoed softly. "I was wondering when you'd finally use that folder." I picked up my handbag from the passenger seat and felt the weight of the folder through the fabric. It wasn't heavy in a physical sense, but in my hands, it carried years of silence. Years of letting them play their games because it seemed easier. I wasn't that woman anymore. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. The clock on the wall read 9:21 p.m. I slipped off my shoes and set them neatly by the door, a habit I'd never shaken. I placed my handbag on the kitchen counter, but I didn't turn on the bright overhead light. Instead, I clicked on the small lamp near the kitchen window. Its warm glow pooled over the table, softening the edges of the room. I pulled the brown folder out and set it down. Its corners were worn and the string tie had started to fray. My fingers hesitated for half a second, not out of doubt but respect. This folder wasn't just paper. It was history. When I untied it, the sound was small but deliberate, like opening a sealed letter that had waited too long. Inside were property deeds, handwritten letters from my grandfather, and legal addendums most of the family had forgotten existed. Most, but not me. The top document was the property title for the house. The house where tonight's dinner had taken place. My parents had always treated it as their legacy, their crown jewel. They'd hosted charity dinners there, family events, and more recently lavish anniversary celebrations. But legally, it wasn't theirs alone. My grandfather had been a shrewd man. He'd built the house himself, brick by brick, quite literally. He had a habit of hiding small, clever legal clauses in his documents. Back then, people called it paranoia. Now I saw it for what it was, foresight. Halfway down the second page, the words stared back at me, clear as the day they were typed. In the event that parents' names fail to uphold the agreed financial arrangement or attempt to transfer, modify, or exclude rightful heirs, the primary ownership shall revert to my name, with full legal authority to reclaim the property without contest. I traced the line with my finger. The ink had faded slightly, but it was all there. Witness signatures. A notary stamp. My own name typed cleanly. I remembered sitting next to my grandfather at the kitchen table decades ago as he explained it to me. I'd been barely 20 then, still trying to understand why he trusted me with something so weighty. You listen when others talk over you, he'd said. That's your advantage. One day they'll forget these papers exist. You won't. He was right. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer again. He picked up on the second ring just like earlier. Evening again, he said, his tone calm but alert. I'm looking at it, I replied. The clause. Yes. A small pause. I've had a copy in my office for years, he said. I always figured you'd call sooner. Better late than never, I answered, my voice steady. I want to move forward. Are you sure? He asked. Not because he doubted me, but because he knew what this meant. Families break quietly before they shatter loudly. I looked down at the page at my grandfather's signature. I'm sure. The next hour passed in quiet, methodical work. I laid every document out on the kitchen table in chronological order. Property transfers. Tax records. Bank receipts. Letters from the lawyer's office confirming ownership clauses. I brewed a small cup of chamomile tea and let the steam curl into the lamplight while I read. Page after page, the truth was the same. Legally, that house wasn't theirs to use as a prop. They'd violated the original financial arrangement years ago when they refinanced without including me. They thought no one noticed. But I had. I'd just been waiting for the right time. Around 10:30 p.m. I called my lawyer back. We'll file first thing Monday, he said. Quietly. No letters to them yet. Just the paperwork. It'll take a few days to process. Good, I said. I don't want them to see this coming. He chuckled softly. You're your grandfather's granddaughter. I learned from the best, I replied. The house creaked softly as I moved through the living room, gathering a few more files from the cabinet. I hadn't touched these in years. There were old photographs tucked between pages. Pictures of my grandfather standing on the front porch with his arms crossed, the house still under construction behind him. His handwriting on the back. Ours. Always ours. I pressed the photo against my chest for a moment. Not out of sentimentality but as a reminder. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about restoring something that had been quietly stolen while everyone smiled for the camera. At 11:17 p.m. my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from my sister. You left early. Everything okay? I stared at the text for a moment, the nerve of it almost amusing. She knew exactly why I'd left. She just wanted to see if I'd break the silence first. I typed back a single word, fine. Then I turned the phone over and placed it face down on the table. As midnight approached, the folder was neatly repacked. Every page had been reviewed, signed where needed, and labeled with sticky notes. My kitchen table looked like a legal command center. But unlike the loud confrontations my family was so fond of, this was silent. Clean. Paper doesn't raise its voice. It just waits for the right moment to be read. Before heading to bed, I took the folder to the small safe in my bedroom closet. I hadn't used that safe for years, but the key still turned smoothly. I placed the folder inside, locked it, and felt a quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. Lying in bed, the house around me dark, my mind didn't race. It planned. Quietly. Methodically. They thought tonight's insult would linger like a bruise and fade away. But I had something they didn't. Time, patience, and a legal clause they'd long forgotten. I pictured their faces when the papers arrived. My mother's tight smile faltering. My father's forced laugh drying up mid-sentence. My sister's false confidence cracking like old paint. I didn't need to yell to make a point. I just needed to sign. Sometime after midnight, the wind picked up outside, brushing against the window pane. I pulled the blanket tighter and closed my eyes. The house was quiet, but beneath that quiet, something had shifted. For years, their control over the family narrative had been built on the assumption that I'd never use what I held. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I woke up the next morning with that thought sitting calmly in my chest. The sky was still dim, a pale gray light spilling through the curtains. For the first time in years, I didn't dread what the day might bring. I lay still for a few moments, listening to the house creak softly as the sun began to rise. Outside, a breeze carried the scent of wet earth. It had rained lightly overnight. It felt like the world itself had shifted, even if just a little. I brewed my usual cup of coffee, black, strong, nothing fancy, and set it on the kitchen table where the folder had been the night before. The table was clear now, but the weight of what I'd done lingered like the smell of roasted beans. Filing would begin that morning. There would be no ceremony, no announcement. Just quiet legal machinery turning exactly the way it was meant to. By 8:05 a.m., I had changed into a clean blouse and slacks, nothing extravagant, just neat. I locked the house behind me, folder tucked under my arm, and drove to my lawyer's office downtown. The roads were damp, sunlight glinting off puddles. I remember thinking how ordinary everything looked, even though everything was about to change. His office was on the third floor of an old brick building, the kind with uneven steps and creaky banisters. The receptionist smiled politely as I entered. "Good morning, Mrs." she started. "I know where I'm going," I interrupted gently. I'd been there before years ago, though never for anything like this. Inside his office, my lawyer was already standing, a pen tucked behind his ear, papers laid out neatly on his desk. "Right on time," he said. "I don't like being late," I replied. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Let's get started." The signing took less than 15 minutes. A few signatures here, a couple of initials there, and just like that, the process was set in motion. Quiet. Precise. Irreversible. "When will they know?" I asked, sliding the pen back across the desk. "In a few days," he said. "But the clock starts now. The paperwork is filed as of this morning." I nodded, letting the words sink in. The clock starts now. As I walked out of his office, the morning sun had fully broken through the clouds, bright and sharp. It warmed my shoulders as I stepped onto the sidewalk. It wasn't joy I felt, it was something steadier, heavier. A sense of timing locking into place. 2 days passed before the first ripple reached them. I was in the garden trimming the overgrown hydrangeas when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my father's number. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. A minute later, my mother's number flashed. Then my sister's. I didn't answer any of them. By late afternoon, the calls had piled up. 10 missed calls. Then 15. By evening, over 20. I placed the phone face down on the porch railing, the buzzing against the wood like a trapped insect. They must have received the notice. Inside the house, the kettle whistled softly. I made tea and carried it to the front porch, settling into the rocking chair. The sun was dipping low, washing the neighborhood in soft orange light. Across the street, my neighbor Marlene waved. She'd lived there for 40 years, seen my family's rise and their carefully crafted appearances. "You've got a busy phone today," she called. "Family," I said simply. She nodded knowingly. "It's always family." The following morning they came in person. I heard their car before I saw it. My father's old sedan, the engine too loud because he refused to admit it needed repairs. I stayed by the window as they pulled into my driveway. My mother stepped out first, her lips pressed tightly together. My father followed, looking more uncomfortable than angry. My sister was in the back seat, watching through the glass like a cat behind a curtain. They rang the bell twice. I didn't rush. I took my time walking to the door, adjusting the sleeve of my sweater, smoothing my hair. When I opened it, I leaned lightly against the doorframe. "Why didn't you answer your phone?" my mother snapped before I could even greet them. "I was busy," I replied calmly. "With what?" she demanded. "Living my life," I said simply, stepping back to let them in. They settled uneasily in my living room. My mother perched on the edge of the couch, arms crossed. My father sat back but avoided eye contact. My sister stayed in the doorway, arms folded, pretending she wasn't nervous. "What is this?" my mother asked, holding up the letter in a trembling hand. "An eviction notice? Are you out of your mind?" I poured myself a cup of tea. "No," I said, taking a slow sip. "I'm finally in it." She blinked, confused. My father cleared his throat. "You can't be serious about this. It's the family house." "Yes," I said. "And it's legally mine. You know that. You just didn't think I'd do anything about it." My sister scoffed quietly. "You wouldn't actually go through with this. You're just trying to scare us." I turned to her slowly. "Do I look like I'm bluffing?" She didn't answer. Her confidence flickered just slightly. That night after they left, the air around the house felt different. Lighter. I sat on the back porch, listening to crickets chirp in the damp grass. The eviction notice wasn't a threat. It was the beginning of a sequence that couldn't be undone. And sure enough, by the next day, small cracks began to show. First, their insurance company called me. Not them, me. My name was still on several documents they'd conveniently ignored. They'd missed a payment. I told the agent politely to remove my name from the policy entirely. The agent hesitated but complied. Within hours, their coverage lapsed. Then the bank called, asking about auto payments tied to accounts I had partial control over. Old arrangements my parents had assumed I'd forgotten. I didn't argue. I simply withdrew authorization. Quietly. By the end of the week, their utilities had started bouncing back unpaid. Neighbors started to notice. Marlene mentioned it casually while watering her roses. "Saw a utility truck out in front of your parents' place this morning," she said. "Everything okay over there?" "I imagine they'll figure it out," I said with a small smile. It wasn't gloating. It was observation. I didn't need to push. The structure they'd built for themselves was already wobbling. By the fourth day, I received an email from my lawyer. Confirmation that the legal filing had been processed and recorded. The timeline had officially started. 30 days. That same evening I drove past the house. Slowly, quietly. Not to taunt them. Just to see. The grand porch lights were off. 4 years they'd kept them blazing every night like a beacon, a symbol of pride. Now darkness sat heavy on the front steps. A pile of mail rested by the door untouched. Through the windows I caught a glimpse of my mother pacing, phone pressed to her ear. My father sat at the table, hands clasped, staring at nothing. For the first time their house looked smaller. Almost fragile. Back home, I stood at my kitchen window, watching the reflection of the lamplight ripple on the glass. My phone buzzed again. This time a text from my sister. "You don't know what you're starting." I typed back, "Yes, I do." And then I set the phone down, face down again. Late that night the wind picked up. Rain began to patter lightly against the roof. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and sat by the living room window, watching the rain blur the streetlights. They were scrambling now. Calling, pacing, arguing. I could almost hear it through the distance. The walls of their carefully constructed world were beginning to show fractures. And I hadn't raised my voice once. That thought lingered as I stood at the kitchen window, the rain still tapping against the glass. The neighborhood was quiet except for the occasional car passing by, its headlights casting quick streaks of light through the room. I'd grown used to that silence over the years. The kind that doesn't ask for attention but rewards you for listening closely. Tonight it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. I wrapped my shawl tighter around my shoulders and turned off the kitchen light. The house fell into a soft darkness, the kind that feels protective rather than lonely. I climbed the stairs slowly, the wood groaning softly under my feet. My body was tired but my mind was alert. Every piece of the plan was in motion now. All I had to do was hold steady. I hadn't been in bed long when the sound came. A knock. Not a timid one. A firm, urgent, impatient knock that echoed through the hallway like someone testing the strength of the door itself. I sat up slowly, my heart giving a single heavy thud, not of fear but recognition. I knew that knock. I reached for my robe, tied it around my waist and made my way downstairs. The hallway light flicked on automatically as I passed. Their silhouettes were visible through the frosted glass of the front door. 3 figures huddled close under the porch light, their shapes blurred by the rain. I opened the door halfway. My mother stood in front, perfectly styled hair now damp from the weather. Her lipstick was smudged and the look in her eyes wasn't polished anymore. My father hovered slightly behind her, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. My sister stood to the side, umbrella in hand, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. "Can we come in?" my mother asked, not a question really, more of a command dressed as courtesy. I stepped back and gestured toward the living room. Of course. They entered like people walking into a courtroom, careful but tense. My living room was warm and softly lit by a single floor lamp. I didn't bother turning on the overhead lights. My mother took her usual place on the couch as if muscle memory had guided her there. My father stayed standing for a moment, scanning the room like he expected to find hidden cameras. My sister leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, chin slightly lifted, her silent performance of superiority. I stayed by the mantel, hands resting lightly on the edge. The rain pattered against the window behind them. "We need to talk," my mother started. Her voice was tight. "This situation has gone far enough." "Situation," I repeated, the word soft on my tongue like testing a flavor. "Yes," she snapped. "These legal games you're playing, whatever point you're trying to make, it's tearing the family apart." I tilted my head slightly. "I didn't tear anything. I just signed papers." Her jaw tightened. "Don't be clever." "I'm not," I said. "I'm being factual." My father finally sat down, slowly, as if gravity had suddenly grown stronger. "You could have talked to us first," he said. His voice wasn't angry. It was worn, almost pleading. "We could have worked this out privately." I met his eyes. "When exactly was I supposed to have that conversation? Before or after you refinanced the house without telling me? Or maybe after you decided I was better suited for the children's table?" The silence that followed was sharp. My sister shifted uncomfortably, looking away. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be," my mother interjected quickly. "We've always taken care of that house. We've hosted events, we've maintained it." "With my name quietly holding the foundation," I interrupted softly. She blinked. "What?" I leaned forward slightly. "Your maintenance relied on documents and accounts you conveniently left my name on. You used what I held without acknowledging what it meant. And you thought I'd never say a word." Her mouth opened and closed but no sound came out. It was rare to catch her speechless. My sister finally spoke. "Why now? All these years you said nothing. And suddenly you're doing this? It feels spiteful." Her voice was sharper than my mother's, but there was something else underneath it. A thin layer of fear she was trying to bury. She'd built her own security on the illusion that I'd always remain quiet. "It's not sudden," I said. "It's deliberate. There's a difference." She rolled her eyes, a habit she'd never grown out of. "This is about that stupid dinner, isn't it? You're blowing everything up because of where you were seated." I smiled, not out of amusement, but because her blindness was almost predictable. That dinner just reminded me of where I actually stand. And it wasn't at the back table. For a long moment no one spoke. The only sound was the steady rain outside, tapping against the glass like a metronome. My father exhaled slowly and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "Money? Control? Some kind of apology?" I let the question hang. There was a time in my life when I would have scrambled to answer, to soften the edges, to assure everyone that I didn't want to cause trouble. That time was over. What I want, I said slowly, is what's legally mine. What was always meant to be mine. And I want you to stop pretending this is some misunderstanding. My mother straightened, sensing she was losing ground. You're being cold, she said. Heartless. Do you really want to be remembered as the one who broke the family apart? That line might have worked on me years ago. Not anymore. The family broke itself when it treated me like I didn't belong in my own house, I replied. When you used my name as a tool but treated me like an afterthought. Her face softened for a moment, not out of empathy but calculation. If we lose the house, she began carefully, it will ruin us. You know that. I didn't answer right away. That silence was louder than any threat. Then my sister stepped closer. You think this makes you powerful? She hissed. You're going to regret this. Her words weren't loud, but they were sharp enough to slice the air. For a brief second I saw her panic break through the cracks. She wasn't just afraid of losing the house, she was afraid of losing the image she'd built. Of us, of herself. I didn't flinch. No, I said. I think this makes things honest. Finally. The conversation stretched on for nearly an hour. Accusations softened into bargaining. My father suggested temporary arrangements. My mother floated emotional guilt like a lifeline. My sister oscillated between mocking me and begging me to be reasonable. Through it all I stayed calm, anchored by something deeper than their panic. Clarity. Eventually my mother stood abruptly. We'll figure this out, she said, but her voice lacked its usual authority. It sounded more like a hope than a command. As they gathered their things, my father lingered at the door. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. You could stop it. I already started it, I replied. And you knew this day might come. You just thought it never would. When the door closed behind them, the house fell silent again. Rain had stopped. A damp stillness settled over everything, like the world was holding its breath. I walked to the window and watched their car pull away. My sister glanced back once from the back seat, her face lit faintly by the porch light. It wasn't hatred I saw. It was something closer to disbelief, that the quiet one in the corner had finally stood up. I exhaled slowly, my hand resting against the cool glass. There was no going back now. The cracks in their castle weren't just spreading, they were meeting in the center. And this time they'd knocked on my door. I stood at the window a moment longer, watching their car disappear down the wet street. The porch light cast a soft halo on the slick pavement, reflecting the night's earlier rain. The house was silent now, but the kind of silence that comes after a storm has shifted everything in its path. My hand lingered on the glass, cool against my skin. My chest rose slowly as I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. This was it, the final stretch. No more warnings. No more discussions. The next few weeks would decide everything. And I was ready. The following morning began like any other. Coffee. A quiet kitchen. The sound of birds returning after the rain. But beneath that ordinary rhythm something had changed. I felt it in the steadiness of my hands as I folded the morning paper. In the ease with which I moved through the house. I wasn't waiting anymore, I was acting. By noon my lawyer called. His voice carried a calm finality. It's official, he said. The judge signed off this morning. Ownership is now fully reverted to you. They received notice at 10:03 a.m. I didn't smile right away. I just closed my eyes and let the words settle. Ownership is now fully reverted to you. The house that had been held hostage by appearances, manipulation and silence. Mine again on paper and in truth. Thank you, I said quietly. You handled this better than most, he replied. No shouting, no chaos. Just patience. I learned that from my grandfather, I said. And from them. The reaction from their side came swiftly. By mid-afternoon my phone lit up with a barrage of calls and messages. My sister was the first to text, "You've gone too far." Then came my mother, "We need to talk immediately." And finally my father, "We'll be out in a few days. I hope you're proud." I stared at his message longer than the others. There wasn't anger in his words, just fatigue. A quiet acknowledgement that this time the ground beneath them had truly shifted. I set the phone down without replying. There was nothing left to discuss. The days that followed were like watching a well-rehearsed play unravel in slow motion. First, the contractors arrived, men in work boots and tool belts, to remove furniture, pack heirlooms, and disassemble years of curated image. The front yard, once spotless and perfectly manicured, filled with moving boxes and plastic-wrapped portraits. Neighbors slowed their cars to watch. Some pretended not to, feigning interest in the road ahead. Others parked and whispered on sidewalks. Marlene knocked on my door 2 days in. "They're really moving?" she asked, wide-eyed. "They are," I said. She pursed her lips. "About time." I laughed softly, not cruelly, just knowingly. People see more than families like mine ever admit. On the 3rd day I drove to the house. It wasn't out of gloating. It was necessity. I wanted to see it not as the outcast at the children's table, but as the rightful owner returning. The driveway was cluttered with moving trucks and stacks of labeled boxes. Through the open front door, I saw my mother directing movers like a commander in retreat. Her emerald dress was replaced with plain slacks and a sweater, her hair tied back. She looked smaller without the performance. My father sat on the porch steps, elbows on his knees, staring at the gravel. My sister stood at the top of the staircase inside, phone in hand, barking orders about which boxes go to storage and what's too expensive to leave. Her voice carried a brittle edge. I stepped out of the car slowly, the crunch of gravel beneath my shoes turning heads. For a second no one moved. My mother's face tightened, but she didn't speak. My father rose to his feet almost instinctively. "You came," he said quietly. "I did," I answered. "To see what you've done?" My mother's voice cut through the air like a blade. "To see what's mine," I replied calmly. She scoffed, shaking her head. "Cold. You've always been cold." "No," I said. "I've just stopped pretending." Inside the house was in disarray. Furniture half dismantled. Bare walls where paintings had hung. The floral centerpieces from the anniversary dinner were wilted in the corner, forgotten. The echo of my footsteps on the hardwood floors sounded different. Less like a guest, more like someone returning home. My sister trailed behind me, her voice dripping with contempt. "Enjoy your precious house," she muttered. "It won't love you back." I turned to her. "I don't need a house to love me. I just need it to be mine." She fell silent. For once she had no quick retort. The following week the 30-day deadline arrived. They left just before dusk. Their car was piled high with boxes, the moving truck already pulling out of the driveway. My father was the last to close the door. He paused on the front step, looking back, not at me but at the house itself. I could almost see the weight of years press against his shoulders. Choices, appearances, quiet betrayals, they all seemed to settle in that one moment. He gave a small nod, not to me but to something deeper. Then he walked away. My mother refused to make eye contact as she passed. She held her chin high, but her hands trembled slightly on the handle of her purse. My sister was the only one who turned to look at me directly, her eyes blazing. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "No," I said simply. "I won't." She got into the car, slamming the door behind her. And then, they were gone. When the silence returned, it wasn't empty, it was liberating. I stepped through the front door alone. The air inside was still, faintly smelling of wood polish and the lingering trace of my mother's perfume. The walls, stripped bare, seemed to breathe again. Without their presence the house felt larger. Honest. I walked through each room slowly, my fingertips brushing along familiar surfaces. The kitchen where my grandfather once stood making coffee at dawn. The staircase where I used to sit and listen to adult conversations I wasn't meant to hear. The living room where they'd hosted countless events, always with me tucked at the edges. Now every corner belonged to me, not in a selfish way but in a way that finally matched the truth on paper and in my heart. That evening I hosted a small gathering. Nothing extravagant. Just a few close friends, Marlene and my lawyer, who reluctantly accepted a slice of homemade pie as payment. We sat in the dining room, my dining room. Under warm light, the windows open to let the cool air drift in. There were no speeches. No forced smiles. Just easy conversation and laughter that didn't feel performative. For the first time in decades, I felt like the house wasn't a stage. It was a home again. Marlene raised her teacup toward me. "To you," she said with a grin. "And to finally sitting at the head of the table." I laughed, clinking my cup to hers. Exactly where I should have been all along. Later that night, after everyone left, I stood alone in the hallway. The moonlight spilled through the windows, painting silver patterns across the floor. I walked toward the front door and opened it. The night was cool, quiet. The street empty. I stepped outside and turned to look at the house. My house. For years, it had been a symbol of everything they controlled. Every quiet dismissal, every unspoken slight. Tonight it stood differently. Not as their castle, but as my reclaimed ground. A single light glowed in the entryway behind me. I felt no bitterness now, only clarity. Revenge hadn't been loud. It hadn't been cruel. It had been patient, deliberate, and final. I closed the door gently behind me, the click of the lock echoing like a period at the end of a long, unfinished sentence. The house was mine again. And this time so was I. If this story gave you chills, hit subscribe and stay with me, because every family secret has a reckoning waiting to unfold.